You woke up recently and looked at your job, your city, and your daily routine, and felt completely suffocated. You are not ungrateful. Your season just expired. Today, I will show you the 4-phase transition workflow to safely pivot your life into your true calling without destroying everything you have built. Everything may still look respectable from the outside. Your bills might be paid. Your calendar might be full. Your life might even appear stable enough that other people would call it a blessing. But there is a difference between having a life that functions and having a life that still fits. That is the part almost nobody sees. They see the routine. They see the paycheck. They see the apartment, the role, the responsibilities, the image you have maintained. What they do not feel is the quiet pressure building inside you every time you wake up and realize you cannot keep living on autopilot without losing something essential in yourself. And when that pressure starts rising, most people do what they were trained to do. They shame themselves. They call themselves dramatic. They say, maybe I am just tired. Maybe I need to be more grateful. Maybe this is what adulthood feels like. But sometimes, the reason you feel restless is not because you are broken. It is because you have reached the edge of a season that can no longer hold who you are becoming. Think of a lobster outgrowing its shell. The pressure is not punishment. The pressure is the signal. So in this video, we are not going to glorify reckless escape. We are going to understand the discomfort, survive the uncertainty, and build a grounded path from the life that is expiring to the life that is trying to begin. There comes a point in some seasons of life where nothing is obviously wrong, but nothing feels fully alive anymore either. That is what makes this stage so confusing. If something were clearly toxic, clearly abusive, clearly broken, the decision would feel simpler. But often, this kind of ending does not arrive with a dramatic explosion. It arrives as a slow suffocation. You start noticing that ordinary parts of your life now require an unnatural amount of effort. Getting out of bed feels heavier than it used to. Small tasks drain you more than they should. Conversations that once felt neutral now feel irritating. Places that used to feel familiar now feel strangely foreign. It is not always because your life is terrible. Sometimes it is because your soul has stopped agreeing to stay where your body still lives. And because there is no visible disaster, you try to negotiate with the discomfort. You tell yourself to give it another month, then another season, then another year. You freshen up your routine. You take a short trip. You buy something. You reorganize your apartment. You promise yourself that once work calms down, once the weather changes, once you get through this next stretch, you will feel like yourself again. But deep down, you know something unsettling. You are not just tired of your schedule. You are tired of being who you have to be in that environment. That is an entirely different kind of exhaustion. A lot of people stay stuck here because they misread the signal. They assume discomfort automatically means something is wrong with them. They wonder if they are lazy, unstable, spoiled, or incapable of commitment. They compare themselves to people who seem content doing the very things that now make them feel trapped. So instead of investigating their inner friction, they start judging it. But discomfort is not always dysfunction. Sometimes, discomfort is the final mercy that arrives when you have ignored quieter whispers for too long. At first, life usually whispers. It sends subtle signals, a loss of excitement, a strange resistance, a recurring thought you cannot shake, a private longing that keeps returning in quiet moments, a growing sense that your current life, while maybe once right for you, is no longer aligned with who you are becoming. When those whispers are dismissed long enough, they often become pressure. That is the divine discomfort. It is the kind of inner friction that makes the old life feel tighter, louder, heavier, more exhausting than before. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because something in you can no longer keep pretending that this space still fits. Discomfort is not depression. Discomfort is a compass. That distinction matters. Depression empties the world of meaning. Divine discomfort points to a mismatch. It creates friction around what has expired. It does not just say, everything is hopeless. It says, this place, this rhythm, this identity, this version of your life is no longer where you are meant to remain. Now, that does not mean every difficult season is a sign to leave. Some seasons require endurance, discipline, healing, or better boundaries. Not every hard thing is misalignment. But when a season has expired, the friction has a very particular feel to it. You are not merely challenged. You feel cramped, reduced, dimmed. You can still function, but not freely. You can still perform, but not breathe. It is like being emotionally folded into a shape that no longer matches your real size. And here is why this phase becomes unbearable. The longer you stay past your expiration date, the more energy it takes to maintain a life that used to happen naturally. You start overcompensating. You perform enthusiasm. You fake certainty. You tell people you are fine. You become an actor in a role you once actually loved. That is why people around you may not understand your urge to leave. On paper, your life still makes sense, but paper cannot measure aliveness. Paper cannot measure peace. Paper cannot measure whether your spirit has already started packing. This is where honesty becomes sacred. Before you make any dramatic decision, you need to identify where the heaviest friction is actually coming from. Not the loudest complaint, not the most socially acceptable answer. The real source. Because sometimes it is the job, sometimes it is the city, sometimes it is a relationship dynamic, sometimes it is the pace of your life, sometimes it is not one thing, but the identity you built to survive a former season that you no longer need to be. So here is the practical work. Audit your life. Take a deep breath and accept that change is happening. Then, begin with 4 simple categories: environment, relationships, work, and self. In each area, ask one question: where do I feel the heaviest friction right now in your environment? Notice what spaces make you feel contracted. Is it your city, your home, your routine, your constant noise, your lack of solitude, your lack of inspiration? Some places nourish you. Some places numb you. Some places helped an old version of you survive, but cannot help the next version of you grow. In your relationships, notice where you feel unseen, over-responsible, or emotionally drained. This does not mean blaming people. It means telling the truth about the energy exchange. Who makes you feel more like yourself? Who makes you feel smaller, guiltier, more performative, more stuck in an outdated identity? In your work, ask yourself whether you are merely stressed or fundamentally disconnected. Stress can be temporary. Disconnection has a deeper ache. It often sounds like this: I can do this, but I do not belong here anymore. I know how to perform this role, but it is costing me too much life force to keep pretending it matters to me in the same way. And in the category of self, ask the hardest question of all: What part of me is begging for a different life? Is it your creativity, your peace, your health, your faith, your freedom, your honesty? Sometimes the real grief is not that your life is bad. It is that your real self has had to wait too long. What is the one thing you are terrified to walk away from right now? Sit with that question carefully, because fear often guards the exact doorway you have been avoiding. The goal of this audit is not to blow up your life tonight. The goal is to stop lying to yourself about what feels heavy. Once you can name the friction, you stop drowning in vague restlessness. You begin to see the shape of the problem, and that matters, because clarity is what turns emotional chaos into wise action. When a season expires, your first responsibility is not to leap. It is to recognize, because once you can honestly say, "This no longer fits," you are no longer just restless. You are awake. And waking up is where the transition begins. Once you recognize that a season has truly expired, something unexpected often happens. You do not immediately feel free. You feel disoriented, because there is a strange emotional stage that begins after you can no longer fully belong to the old life, but before the new life has taken shape. And this is the phase that makes many people panic, not because they made the wrong decision, but because they expected clarity to feel cleaner than it actually does. It rarely does. There is usually a hallway. A hallway is that in-between space where one door has clearly closed, but the next door has not opened wide enough for you to walk through yet. You know something is ending. You know you cannot return to sleep, but you also do not yet have the full map, the full money, the full certainty, the full identity, or the full proof that the next chapter will hold you. That gap can feel brutal. This is where people say things like, "My life is falling apart. I cannot focus. Nothing feels stable. I do not know who I am anymore. I thought I would feel relief once I admitted the truth, but instead I feel more afraid than before." That reaction is deeply human, because the hallway dismantles the illusion of control. In the old season, even if you were unhappy, at least the pattern was familiar. You knew what to expect. You knew how to answer when people asked what you were doing with your life. You knew the rules of the role, even if the role was suffocating you. Familiar pain still feels safer to the nervous system than unfamiliar possibility. So the moment you begin loosening your grip on the old life, your mind often interprets that as danger. It starts producing emergency thoughts. What if I ruin everything? What if I regret this? What if I am being irrational? What if I leave and nothing better comes? What if this urge for change is just instability? What if I am throwing away something people would be grateful to have? Notice what is happening there. The mind is trying to use fear to drag you back into certainty, not peace. Certainty, and certainty is not always the same thing as alignment. This matters, because if you do not understand the psychology of the hallway, you will mislabel the transition as failure. You will assume that confusion means stop. You will assume that fear means no. You will assume that the shaking in your chest is proof that you should return to the life you already know is too small. But the hallway is not proof you are off track. The hallway is what it feels like to outgrow one identity before you have fully embodied the next. That is why this phase can feel like grief, withdrawal, hope, terror, and relief all in the same week. You are not just changing logistics. You are detaching from a version of self that once kept your world organized. Even if that version of you is exhausted, there is still loss involved in leaving it behind. You may grieve the image you had of your life. You may grieve the timeline you thought you were on. You may grieve how other people saw you. You may even grieve the comfort of being understandable, Because in the hallway, you often become less legible before you become more aligned. That can feel lonely, especially when the people around you only know how to support decisions that come with immediate proof. They understand promotions, engagement announcements, accepted offers, signed leases, tidy transitions. They are less comfortable with the kind of change that begins as an internal truth before it becomes external evidence. So when you say, "I just know I cannot stay here," some people will hear instability, some will hear drama, some will try to calm you back into the version of you they are most comfortable with. That does not always mean they are against you. Sometimes it simply means they cannot see what is becoming visible to you yet. This is why panic is so dangerous in the hallway. Panic will tempt you into one of two extremes. Either you run backward into the expired life because uncertainty feels unbearable, or you run forward recklessly just to end the discomfort of not knowing. Both reactions come from the same place, a desperate attempt to escape ambiguity. But ambiguity is not always an emergency. Sometimes ambiguity is incubation. Sometimes the reason the next door has not fully opened is because you are still being asked to develop the inner steadiness required to walk through it well. So here is the mental framework I want to give you for this phase. Do not ask, "How do I get rid of uncertainty?" Ask, "How do I stay regulated inside uncertainty?" That question changes everything. Because the goal is not to become a person who never feels fear. The goal is to become a person who can feel fear without surrendering their clarity to it. That means when the mind starts spiraling, you do not instantly obey every thought. You slow the moment down. You name what is happening. You say to yourself, "I am in a transition. My old structure is loosening. My nervous system is interpreting change as danger. I do not need to make this confusion mean I am lost." This is where the recap matters. Discomfort is not depression. Discomfort is a compass. And in the hallway, the compass does not always give you the full route. Sometimes it only gives you the next true direction. That is enough. A helpful way to think about this is to separate uncertainty into two categories: unknown facts and imagined catastrophes. Unknown facts are real. You may not know exactly where you will move, how long the pivot will take, which opportunity will work, or how certain relationships will shift. Those are genuine unknowns. Imagined catastrophes are the mind filling in those blanks with worst-case stories. I will fail. I will embarrass myself. I will end up alone. I will destroy my future. Everyone will think I am foolish. The problem is that many people respond to imagined catastrophes as if they were facts. And once you do that, your body reacts as though disaster is already happening. So when you feel overwhelmed in this season, ask yourself, what is actually unknown? And what am I inventing because I am scared? That question brings you back to reality. And reality is usually much more workable than panic. Simple viewer exercise. Right now, take a deep breath and accept that change is happening, not all at once, not perfectly, not without fear, but it is happening. And your job in this hallway is not to force the whole future into focus. Your job is to remain honest, grounded, and responsive enough to keep listening for the next clear step. The hallway feels chaotic because your old life is no longer holding your identity together. But that does not mean your life is collapsing. It may mean your life is reorganizing around a deeper truth. And once you stop demanding total certainty before movement, you become ready for the next part. Not just leaving emotionally, leaving wisely. That is where the real pivot begins. Once you have recognized that your current season has expired, and once you have stopped treating the hallway like a personal failure, The next question becomes practical. How do you actually leave well? Because this is where people often split into two unhealthy camps. One group over-spiritualizes the transition and assumes that if the calling is real, details should somehow take care of themselves. The other group becomes so obsessed with safety that they use planning to delay movement forever. One side jumps without structure. The other side hides in structure without ever jumping. A wise pivot needs both faith and preparation. Faith is what allows you to admit that your current life no longer fits. Preparation is what keeps that truth from turning into avoidable chaos. You do not need to choose between trusting the unseen and respecting reality. Mature transitions do both. They honor the inner signal, and they build an outer bridge. So let me give you a grounded way to think about this. The pivot is not one giant dramatic decision. It is a sequence. It is a workflow. And when you break it into phases, the fear becomes more workable because you stop trying to solve your entire future in one emotional moment. Here is the 4-phase pivot workflow. Phase 1 is stabilize. Phase 2 is clarify. Phase 3 is prepare. Phase 4 is execute. Each phase has a different purpose. If you confuse them, you create unnecessary pain. If you respect them, the path becomes much cleaner. Phase 1, stabilize. This is the phase most people want to skip because it does not look exciting, but it is foundational. When you first realize that a season is ending, your emotions can become intense very quickly. Relief, grief, anger, urgency, fear, and hope can all rush in at once. In that state, everything feels immediate. You may want to quit on a hard Tuesday, send a dramatic message, move cities on impulse, or make permanent decisions from temporary emotional flooding. Stabilizing means you do not let the truth of your discomfort turn into chaos in your behavior. You slow down enough to come back into your body and your actual circumstances. You sleep. You regulate. You look at your finances honestly. You stop making your private clarity carry the pressure of public performance. You reduce unnecessary noise so you can hear yourself think. In this phase, the first goal is not action. It is steadiness. Because a regulated person can hear guidance more clearly than a panicked one. This may sound simple, but it matters. If you are emotionally drowning, every inconvenience will feel like a sign, and every fear will feel prophetic. Stabilizing helps you separate signal from static. Phase 2, clarify. Now that you are steadier, you can begin naming what exactly you are moving away from and what exactly you may be moving toward. This phase is about precision. A lot of people say, I want out. But out of what? Specifically. And into what? Specifically. If you cannot answer that with some level of honesty, you are still dealing in emotional fog. Clarifying means asking better questions. What is no longer sustainable for me? What conditions are making me feel most misaligned? What kind of life am I actually craving? What values do I need my next season to protect? What am I unwilling to keep sacrificing? What would a more aligned week look like in real terms? Not fantasy terms. Notice that this is not about constructing a perfect 10-year vision. It is about identifying the core ingredients of the next chapter. Maybe you do not know the exact new job yet, but you know you need more autonomy, more meaning, and less emotional depletion. Maybe you do not know the exact city yet, but you know you need slower living, lower cost, and a stronger sense of belonging. Maybe you do not know the exact role you are called to, but you know your next season cannot be built on constant self-betrayal. That is clarity. Clarity does not always arrive as a full picture. Sometimes it arrives as non-negotiables. And non-negotiables are powerful because they stop you from escaping one misaligned life only to recreate it somewhere new. Phase 3. Prepare. This is where faith gets practical. Preparation is the quiet work that gives your pivot a spine. It is where you gather resources, create timing, reduce risk, and build options. This phase is not glamorous, but it is deeply loving. It is how you care for your future self while honoring the transition. Preparation may involve saving money, reducing expenses, updating your resume, building a portfolio, researching locations, reaching out to mentors, learning a skill, having honest conversations, testing a side path, or setting a target exit window. This is where earthly wisdom comes in. You can feel deeply called to change your life and still need a budget. You can trust the next chapter and still need a plan. You can believe in divine timing and still need to gather documents, make spreadsheets, and understand your runway. This is not a lack of faith. It is respect for the reality you currently live in. A bridge is still faith, even though it uses materials. And this is where I want to introduce the practical takeaway for this chapter, the 9-0-day exit mapping template. Not because every transition must happen in exactly 90 days, but because 90 days is long enough to create momentum and short enough to feel real. It turns vague desire into visible sequence. So here is a simple version. Days 1 through 30 are for assessment and stabilization. Days 31 through 60 are for strategy and setup. Days 61 through 90 are for commitment and transition. In days 1 through 30, you audit your life honestly. You identify the heaviest friction. You stabilize your emotions. You look at your money. You track your monthly essentials. You write down your current obligations. You stop pretending not to know what is true. This first month is about getting clear and getting honest. In days 31 through 60, you begin building the bridge. You define the type of pivot you are making. Career change, relocation, relational restructuring, creative redirection, or some combination. You research options. You cut unnecessary spending. You create a savings target. You update practical tools like your resume, applications, contacts, schedule, or living plan. You begin conversations that your next chapter will require. This second month is about structure. Then, in days 61 through 90, you move from planning into decision. That may mean applying, giving notice, signing the lease, launching the offer, booking the trip, setting the boundary, or naming the date by which the old chapter will end. This third month is about converting readiness into motion. The point of the 9-0-day map is not perfection. The point is proof. Proof that your pivot is no longer just an emotional reaction. Proof that you can honor your inner knowing with outer responsibility. Proof that movement becomes less terrifying when it is broken into steps. Now let me say something important here. Preparation is not the same as endless postponement. There is a version of planning that is wise. And there is a version that is just fear wearing a clipboard. You know planning has become avoidance when every finished task creates the need for one more task before you are allowed to move. One more course. One more month. One more sign, one more cushion, one more confirmation that no discomfort will be required. That day never comes. A lobster does not outgrow its shell by negotiating with it forever. The pressure forces the break. At some point, preparation must serve execution. not replace it. That brings us to phase 4, execute. Execution is when the inner truth and outer plan finally meet in behavior. You submit the resignation. You make the move. You end the pattern. You choose the honest conversation. You take the role. You turn the key. You stop standing at the threshold and actually cross it. And this is where many people discover something surprising. You do not need complete certainty to move. You need enough clarity, enough preparation, and enough self-trust to take the next real step. That is the balance. Faith says, I do not need the whole staircase. Wisdom says, but I will still check that the next step is solid. So if you are in this season right now, stop framing your pivot like one impossible leap. Treat it like a workflow. Stabilize, clarify, prepare, execute, because when you approach change this way, you stop being a victim of the transition and become a steward of it. And once the map exists, the final challenge is no longer understanding what to do. It is finding the courage to do the first thing that makes it real. By the time you reach this phase, something important has already happened. You are no longer confused about whether change is needed. You may still be scared. You may still have questions. You may still wish for more proof, more confirmation, more emotional comfort. But deep down, you know the real issue now is not awareness. It is action, and this is where the transition becomes deeply personal. Because there comes a point when no amount of reflection can take the place of movement. No journal entry can walk for you. No video can decide for you. No sign can eliminate the vulnerability of taking a step before you can see the entire landing pad. This is the moment many people delay the longest, not because they are lazy, not because they are incapable, but because the first real step changes your relationship with the dream. Before action, the new life is still protected by imagination. It is meaningful, but untouched. It lives in possibility. You can think about it, plan for it, talk about it in private, even pray about it, and still remain emotionally safe because nothing has been risked yet. But the moment you take one tangible action, the vision enters reality. And reality is where you can be seen. Reality is where you can fail. Reality is where you can be misunderstood. Reality is where your old identity begins losing its grip for real. That is why the first blind step feels so intense. It is not just about logistics. It is about exposure. You are stepping out of the psychological shelter of maybe someday and into the fragile honesty of now. And this is where people often wait for a feeling that never comes. They tell themselves, I will move when I feel fully ready. I will act when I am not scared anymore. I will decide when I have no doubts left. I will jump when the landing is visible. But that is not how living transitions work. You do not become brave and then move. Very often, you move and discover bravery there. Faith requires movement before the manifestation. Not reckless movement, not fantasy, not denial. Movement, a real email, a real application, a real boundary, a real conversation, a real date on the calendar, a real decision that your nervous system can no longer file under interesting thought. This is why the first blind step matters so much. It interrupts the trance of endless preparation. It tells your mind, we are not just discussing change anymore. We are participating in it. And once that happens, something powerful shifts. You begin building evidence for self-trust. Self-trust does not come only from making perfect choices. It comes from seeing that you can face uncertainty and still remain in relationship with yourself. That you can act while scared. that you can survive the exposure of beginning, that your life does not need to be fully controlled in order to be honestly lived. For some people, the first blind step looks dramatic from the outside. For others, it looks almost laughably small. But do not underestimate small. Concrete movement, a tiny, honest action, can carry more transformational power than months of internal debate, because action reorganizes identity. The person who secretly wants out and the person who has taken one visible step toward out are no longer the same person. So what should that first blind step actually be? It should be tangible. It should be specific. It should be slightly scary. And it should move your transition from concept into contact with reality, not 10 steps. 1. If you are pivoting careers, maybe the first step is sending one application, contacting one person in the field, or blocking time to build the first piece of your portfolio. If you are leaving an environment, maybe the first step is researching real housing numbers, visiting the place you are considering, or setting the savings transfer that funds your exit. If you are ending a pattern in a relationship, maybe the first step is naming the truth clearly instead of softening it to stay light. If you are reclaiming a calling, maybe the first step is finally making the thing public, offering the service, publishing the work, or giving the gift somewhere real people can encounter it. The step does not need to complete the transition. It needs to declare it. That is the difference. A lot of people think courage means taking the biggest leap possible. Often, courage is quieter than that. Courage is making the next irreversible move toward honesty. And yes, this can feel terrifying, because the first step often threatens the system you have been living inside. The people around you may react. Your own fear may spike. The comfort of invisibility may disappear. Parts of you may immediately want to retreat and say, "Never mind. Maybe this was too much." That reaction does not mean the step was wrong. It often means the step was real. When a plane leaves the runway, there is a moment of violent shaking. That does not mean it should return to the gate. It means takeoff is actually happening. That is what the first blind step can feel like. Disruptive, vulnerable, unnatural at first. But disruption is not always danger. Sometimes it is the body adjusting to a higher altitude of truth. So here is the practical takeaway, and I want to make it as plain as possible. Commit to one scary, tangible action step within 24 hours, not next week, not after one more round of overthinking. Within 24 hours, choose one action that your current self can do, that your future self will thank you for, and that your fear has been successfully delaying. Then do it before your mind has time to turn it into philosophy. And when you do not wait for instant peace. What often comes first is activation, adrenaline, vulnerability, a strange mix of grief and relief. That is normal. You are not doing something wrong. You are breaking inertia. The first step will not answer every question. It will not remove all uncertainty. It will not guarantee the whole path. What it does is far more important. It creates momentum. And momentum is sacred in seasons of change. Because once you are in motion, clarity tends to meet you differently. You notice new opportunities. You hear your own voice more clearly. You stop treating your future like a theory. You become available to the next instruction because you obeyed the last one. So, if you have been waiting for the perfect emotional weather to begin, let this be the interruption. Your life may not need another month of private agreement. It may need one honest act, because there is a moment when the season behind you has already ended. And the season ahead of you is waiting on your movement, not your certainty, your movement. And once you take that first blind step, even while shaking, you stop being someone who is only called. You become someone who answered. Maybe this is the real reason you found this video when you did. Not because your life is collapsing, but because your old life is no longer the container for who you are becoming. The discomfort was not there to torment you. It was there to wake you up. The hallway was not there to humiliate you. It was there to loosen your dependence on certainty. The plan was not there to make you rigid. It was there to help you move with wisdom. And the first blind step was not there to prove you are fearless. It was there to prove you are ready to stop abandoning what you know. You do not need to hate your past to leave it. You do not need to explain your transition to people who only respect what they can already understand. And you do not need the entire future revealed before you honor the truth that this season is over. You only need enough honesty to admit what no longer fits. Enough steadiness to stay present in the hallway. Enough wisdom to prepare. And enough courage to take the next real step. So before this day ends, come back to the question, what is the one thing you are terrified to walk away from right now? Do not answer it to impress anyone. Answer it because your freedom is usually hiding behind the truth you are most afraid to say out loud. If this video found you in the middle of a transition, let that be your sign to stop calling yourself ungrateful for outgrowing what once fit. You are not failing. You are being moved. And if this spoke to where you are right now, leave a comment with the words, "My season has changed." That simple sentence might be the first honest step someone else needs to see too.